Okay, today's lesson is going to be on Let There Be Light. And we are going to start with Genesis 1 and I think through 3. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day.
So I got a question.
We'll answer questions later, so why don't you write it down so that you don't forget it. So we'll have that after we turn the camera on. So there's a big problem here, in my mind, because God created light on day 1. But on day 4, verses 14 and through 19, and God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 4th day. So, my problem is, there's light on the first day, but the sun doesn't get made until the 4th day. And so I puzzled over that, and as I prayed about it, I remembered some verses in Revelation. And so we'll look at the verse in Revelation 22, verse 5. Revelation 22, verse 5 says, this is talking about what will be like when there's a new heaven and a new earth. "There will be no more night. They will not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever." So this is perplexing, because there's not even going to be any night, but there will be continuous light, and God will be our light at that time. So light is not dependent on the sun for there to be light. So that answered my question, but it's still very perplexing of what it's going to be like when there's no night at all. And when we think of light, we always think of it coming from a source like the sun, a light fixture, a candle, and
the moon.
The moon. The moon is actually not a source of light, it's a reflection. The moon is like a mirror of the light from the sun hits the moon and is reflected back to the earth. So it's kind of a source of light and kind of not. But at any rate, we think of it coming from a source, and apparently the source is God. God is light. And I want us also to look at Revelation 4, 1 through 3. And this, of course, is John having a vision of God. "After this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I heard first speaking to me like a trumpet said, 'Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this.' At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelia. A rainbow resembling an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the thrones were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings, and peals of thunder. Before the throne 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits of God. Also before the throne was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal." So this is a vision of God, and surrounding God is a rainbow, and he's like jewels, jasper and carnelian, semi-precious stones. So we have a little bit of a picture of light coming from God here. And then in the book of Ezekiel, there's another vision. Ezekiel had a vision of God. And there was this vision of wheels and these creatures, 4 creatures with all the different heads. And then on top of that was this throne. So Ezekiel 1:25 through 28. Then there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads as they stood with lowered wings. Above the expanse over their heads was what looked like a throne of sapphire, another jewel. And high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, and that from there down he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him. Like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. When I saw it, I fell face down, and I heard the voice of one speaking. So the glory of the Lord is like a rainbow. Lots of light. And there was this glowing like fire. So that kind of answered my question of how there could be light on day 1 when we did not have sun, moon, and stars. And we won't have sun, moon, and stars at the end of the earth. So, one of the enigmas in quantum physics, of course, they have many enigmas, but light defies definition, or you just can't pin it down on what it actually is, because originally everybody thought light was a wave. We have light waves, and different colors have different frequencies. Some light waves we can't even see, the ultraviolet and the infrared. We can't really see those light waves. Well, some of the infrared, I guess we can. But there are some levels, frequencies that we can't see. Just like there are some frequencies that we can't hear. You've all heard of a dog whistle, where somebody will blow a whistle and the dogs in the neighborhood all start barking, but the humans can't hear it. One time when Ed used to work for the telephone company, and I went to pick him up, and I went inside, and there was this woman sitting at the receptionist's desk, and behind her I could hear this high-pitched noise. And I was like, doesn't that drive you crazy? How can you stand that? And she said, oh, can you hear it too? None of the guys here can hear it. I don't know. None of the guys, they're all telephoned in, whether they all had hearing losses or what. But they couldn't hear it, but I could. And because I verified that, yes, there was this high-pitched noise, they got out their test equipment, and they could test it, and they could hear the high-pitched noise. They could hear it, but they could detect it with their equipment. So there's lots of things we can't hear or see, but they have a frequency. And so we know that light has frequency, and different colors have different frequencies. But the problem is, in some of the experiments that they've done, now that they have more high-tech things that they can do in the quantum physics world, they discovered that sometimes light does not act like a wave, it acts like a particle. Particle is just one little photon that they bombard. They've done experiments where they will take a panel, put a little slit in it, and then they will very slowly let photons through the little slit, and then it's picked up on a photographic panel, like photograph paper or something, so they know where that photon hits. And so you expect you've got these little particles just going through. They're not waves, just tiny little particles going through. But what happens is, once it gets through the slit, it makes a pattern like a wave. And they're perplexed. How can it do that? How can this little point make a pattern? And when you've got 2 points going, the patterns intertwine. And so you've got 2 points going through slits, and it still intertwines. It makes these patterns. And it's kind of like if you have a still pond, and you drop a rock little stone in it, you're going to get ripples. And if you drop two, you're going to get two ripples that intertwine, and so it creates a very different pattern. And so that's what light and sound waves are also going to have this same kind of thing, patterns. And so this is all very perplexing to quantum physics, because is light a particle? Is light a wave? It has characteristics of both. And they don't know what to call it. They don't know how to. And some of the books that I've read said it's very similar to the brain is a physical thing. It's something you can touch. You know, a surgeon can open up your skull and touch your brain. But thoughts are not something physical. The thoughts are maybe created chemically and electrical energy going around making these thoughts. But scientists can't see your thoughts. And so you've got a mind and you've got a brain, and they're kind of the same thing, but one of them is physical, like a particle is very physical, and one of them is more like the wave, the light wave. So we're seeing a lot of duality in different things in quantum physics, and it's not either or, it's both. And it's difficult to understand as the body and the spirit, the soul of a human being. It's that intertwined. Okay. Then we want to look at John 1, 4 through 5. And this is back where we were at the Word. In the beginning was the Word. But when you go down to verse 4, in him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. And so the him here is Jesus, or the Logos that we looked at last week. In the Logos was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. So the Logos is actually light as well. Not only is it the Word that we learned the first, in the beginning was the Word, and God spoke, the Word thing, but the Logos is also light. Then we have the idea of evening and morning, dusk and dawn. One of the things that I looked at made the claim that this evening and morning, that it talks about day 1, there was evening, there was morning, day 2, there was evening and morning, that the evening and morning could be translated dark and light. There was dark and there was light. I looked it up in Strong's Concordance because I wanted to see if that was true, and I didn't find that. I found dusk and dawn, but it does come from the root word of dark. So it could be that that God is saying dark and light, instead of just there being this 24-hour day cycle, because the sun and the moon are not created yet. And next week we are going to talk about time, because time was actually not created until the sun, the moon, and the stars. So, but evening and morning, dusk. Now our bodies are very much dependent on this whole idea of dark and light. And I have been studying this from a health point of view because my doctor wanted me to take a hormone called melatonin. It's over the counter. You just go get melatonin. Easy to come by. And it's got so many wonderful properties. It's antioxidant, anti-cancer. It does a lot of wonderful things for people, but it also regulates your sleep.
Yeah, isn't that what that's for?
Sleep. So that's why when you sleep, your body has more opportunity to heal. But it totally depends on light and dark. And they say when you take melatonin, it's best to sleep in a totally dark room. And so I was at the thrift store, of course I always find things at thrift stores, and I came across with a book called Melatonin, great big book, and I bought it, and it was fascinating. I'm going to read a few things from that book. The first one is about a study that's done in Finland. Of course, Finland doesn't have as much light as we have here. People in Florida get more melatonin than people up here in Minnesota, right? So Finland is going to be the same situation. So their researchers were interested in the whole process, and so they did a study with rats. Okay. It's a 1988 study in Finland. In their study, they kept one group of rats in a windowless room that was illuminated with fluorescent lights, and then in another room that had natural sunlight. And they exposed both groups to the same duration of light. So when the sun went down, they turned the fluorescent lights off. When the sun came up, they turned the fluorescent lights on. After 1 week, the researchers measured the melatonin levels of the two groups. The rats in the sunlit room were producing far more melatonin than the ones in the artificial lighting environment. And so there's a lot of different things because fluorescent light doesn't have the full spectrum. You know, we talked about the different waves. Well, the fluorescent lights only have a certain bit of the waves that the sunlight would have. That's one difference. But there's also the matter of intensity. So the room that didn't have windows has 400 lux. Now, I'm going to explain what a lux is. 100 lux is the amount of light that would enter your eyes if you were looking at a 100-watt light bulb from a distance of 5 feet. So the ones with the fluorescent lights, they had 400 lux shining on them. But the sunlight, the natural lit room, had 3,000 lux on a bright sunny day. So that's more than 7 times the amount of fluorescent light bulbs. So if we spend our days in a fluorescent lit room compared to being outside, which is what our forefathers would have been working out in a farm or something, we are receiving a lot less light, therefore we are producing a lot less melatonin. Okay, another difference was that they turned the lights on and it just came on with a blast, whereas in a natural situation, the light comes on gradually, it goes away gradually. So those were the differences. Now, but during the day, at night we make melatonin. During the day, the opposite is the serotonin. Serotonin is a lot of the antidepressants like Prozac, I believe, is a serotonin uptake inhibitor. So it works, the serotonin is something that these antidepressants are trying to conserve in our bodies. We need serotonin for our emotional well-being. So here's another one. In 1993, 15 men and women in their 20s and 30s spent 4 hours in bright light, 2,500 lux. And then 4 hours the next day in moderate light, only 500 lux. Before being exposed to the light, and then periodically throughout the day, they were given various tests to see their physical and mental condition. And in a test of their reaction time, they made fewer errors after being exposed to bright light than to the dimmer light. And significant improvements after bright light were also found in their cognitive function, wakefulness, and reaction time. Most important, under the bright light conditions, the volunteers reported a much greater sense of well-being. Okay, so what they think is the reason for that is the increase in serotonin. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter that is enhanced by antidepressant drugs such as Prozac, Zoloft, and Paxil. And in 1992, researchers measured the serotonin levels of 2 groups of volunteers before and after light therapy. One of the groups was composed of people with depression, and the other group were just healthy controls. Following the light therapy, both groups showed a significant increase in serotonin, but the depressed group benefited more than the non-depressed group. So if you're depressed, go outside, get some sunshine. In fact, they have light boxes that people can sit by this light box to get the light they need for their depression.
Do you think that affects people that work nights and sleep during the day?
Yes, it does. But questions, write them down because we're recording and we will discuss after the recording. Okay, so Serotonin keeps you alert and energized during the day. Melatonin helps you rest and recuperate, and are enhanced by exposure to bright light during the day. So, when night comes, it's just as important to be in the dark. But what do? We turn on the lights in the evening, where we have things we want to get done at night. And so we are not only light deprived, but we are dark deprived. And so, anyway, so that's the deal about melatonin and serotonin. And I wanted to also talk just a little bit about frequency. Last week I mentioned that a healthy human being has a frequency of between 62 and 68 megahertz. And just that cup of coffee that many of you are having actually lowers your frequency, and it takes maybe 24 hours for the frequency to pop. But there are ways to raise that frequency, and that is with essential oils, which a lot of you who know me know I love essential oils. I'm going to read to you about lavender, which is one of my favorite essential oils. Has a megahertz of 118, so if you put just a drop of lavender on it, it helps your body raise the megahertz. Myrrh, which is mentioned in the Bible, has 105, and blue chamomile only 10, but still, that helps. And then I'm not sure that's right. That might be 105, I think. My computer kind of cut it off. All right, juniper 98, aloe and sandalwood 96, peppermint 78. Interesting, peppermint is also supposed to help with motion sickness, and my grandmother used to give us little peppermint candies when we were going in the car. And basil is 52. So you can actually raise your megahertz by adding the essential oils. You can raise your melatonin by going out in the sun. So there's all kinds of things that we can do to raise our bodies to where they need to be healthy. Okay, so let's